Hi, I want to welcome you to our training on autism disclosure in the workplace called To Tell or Not to Tell. My name is Jennifer Feinstein. I am a case manager in the Daniel Jordan Fiddle Foundation Transition and Adult Programs at UM-NSU CARD. I work with teens and adults, and my focus is on employment. So I help people make the decisions that we're going to talk about today for disclosure, as well as other decisions related to employment. And I also am a mom, and I have a 24-year-old son with autism who is also working. So welcome to our talk. So today we have some objectives. First of all, we're going to go over the law surrounding disability disclosure, the ADA, and I hope that you'll gain a basic understanding of that law and how it relates to your decision making. We're going to learn about some helpful accommodations that are possible that you might want to ask for. If you have ASD, we're going to talk about when, how, and why you might want to disclose your disability. And then hopefully you'll end this training with the ability to kind of apply all that you've learned to your own decision-making process. So first of all, we will talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which everyone calls the ADA. So it's a law, it was signed into law in 1990. And basically, the purpose is to make our society more accessible to people with disabilities. It covers a lot of broad areas. The one that's important for employment is called Title I. And basically what it requires is that covered employers provide reasonable accommodations for applicants and employees with disabilities, and it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in all aspects of employment. So just some things that might be included in reasonable accommodation, which this wording exists, is maybe restructuring jobs, making work sites and workstations accessible, modifying schedules, providing services such as interpreters, and maybe even modifying some policies, okay? So basically, the ADA, which is the national law, covers employers with 15 or more employees. That includes state and local governments. And it applies to employment agencies and labor organizations, and federal employees, federal sector employees. And then smaller companies, smaller than 15, are covered under local statutes. So almost every local city or county will have some statutes that cover non-discrimination. And so I looked up ours in Miami-Dade County, Florida. It's the Code of Ordinances, and it's Chapter 11A under discrimination, and then Article 4 is employment. And the wording is very, very similar to the ADA. So basically, the law is going to cover all terms, conditions, and privileges of employment. So we feel like people who are able to be employed are actually enjoying a right and a privilege to be able to be gainfully employed. So we're going to try, this law is to prevent discrimination in this area, and it covers all the areas. So job applications, so you are covered from discrimination even before you apply for a job. Hiring, firing, advancement, compensation, and also job training. So basically, if you're wondering, do I have rights under the ADA? So what it says is that it protects qualified employees with disabilities, right? So you need to know, am I a qualified employee and do I have a disability? So to be a qualified employee, it means that you satisfy the skill, experience, education, and other job-related requirements of the position sought or held. And this is important, that you can perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodations. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about those two areas, but it's important to remember essential functions of the job and reasonable accommodations. And then a definition of a disability is a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So autism is considered a disability. So essential job functions are the fundamental duties of the employment position that the individual holds or desires. So these are going to be the basic things where it's the kind of the purpose of the job. These are the things you have to be able to do in order to get the job done. But remember, you can do them with or without reasonable accommodations. So a reasonable accommodation is a modification or an adjustment to the job or the work environment, or the way things are done that will help a person with a disability enjoy the equal opportunity. So the way that the example I like to use to help people understand it is the example of a receptionist position. And the essential function for this job is to answer the phones for this company, okay? So if we might have, let's say we have two different applicants, okay? One of them comes in and says, I have a disability, I am hearing impaired, but I have this headset that is inexpensive, and as long as I get this headset, I can answer the phone, I can deal with customers, I can handle the position. So that's an example of a reasonable accommodation. It's inexpensive, but this person might even bring their own. But if the company were to provide it, it's an inexpensive headset that they can use, and it helps them hear, and they are able to do the essential job functions with an accommodation. Now, let's say we have another applicant who comes in and says, maybe they even have autism, but due to my anxiety, I am unable to talk on the phone. I cannot answer the phone and deal with customers. I'm really not good with people. And so I'm not able to, but I can file, I can, do all sorts of data entry. I'm really smart with computers. I'm really good at a lot of things, but I can't answer the phone. So that's a person who has, yes, they have a disability of autism, but they're saying that they cannot do the essential function of the job no matter what accommodation it is. They're just saying, I can't do it. So that person does not need to be hired because they are not able to perform the essential functions of the job. So just something to keep in mind when you are understanding the ADA is that employers don't have to provide accommodation if it imposes an undue hardship. So they do have legal definitions of undue hardship. And again, this is legal information. But you can run into this where a company might say, we don't have to provide that accommodation for you because that's going to cause an undue hardship. So it means that it would require significant difficulty or expense. And then they'll take into consideration the different factors like the employer size, the financial resources, and then of course the nature of the operation. So you're not going to be able to completely change the way that a company works necessarily, unless they're willing to again. So that's one thing to remember. So another couple things to keep in mind for you to know, this is important. The law also restricts what employers can ask you. So they're not allowed to ask you about your health, your age, or your disability, either directly or indirectly. And this can get confusing for some employers. If you disclose to them, they may not be comfortable. They may not know, if this has never happened to them before, they may not know what they're allowed to ask you. Also important to remember, this information about you is confidential. So you control the information and you control who it's released to and how much of it is released, but that information is confidential to you. That is why you are disclosing your disability if you want to. And that's the last point that's important is that it's okay to disclose at any time in the process. So you can disclose before you get a job, or you can work for a place for 20 years and never have told them about your disability, but then decide you want to disclose because you need some accommodations. But you're not required to disclose a disability. So I get asked this question a lot. Do I have to tell them that I have autism? And the answer is no, you do not have to. Okay, so hopefully that is clear and that gives us a little background for understanding how we're protected and then thinking about how we might want to make our decisions to disclose. So the first question that I suggest you ask yourself and answer for yourself is, why do I want to disclose, right? Because the reason why you want to disclose is going to help you decide when and how. There's different reasons that people might want to disclose their disability. So probably the number one reason that you're going to consider in a workplace is that you're going to need an accommodation, or you think maybe you'll need an accommodation and you would like to ask them for that accommodation. So I would say, let your needs be your guide. Do you need an accommodation for the interview process or the application process? Well, then you're going to want to disclose before that process starts. And then the other thing is, like, are you going to bring a job coach? You know, many of us work with job coaches in the community, and that can be really wonderful and incredibly helpful to you. And some job coaches or employment specialists will help you find a job. So they'll work with you even before you get a job. So if you are going to have a job coach who helps you get a job or helps you with the interview process or comes to be at work with you, you will want to disclose, because having a job coach is actually a form of an accommodation. It's having a person come into the workspace and help you. Some offices have rules about who can and cannot visit. And so if you're going to have a person come for an extended period of time at work with you, that you're going to need to disclose who that person is and why they're there to help you. So then there's other reasons that people want to disclose too. And these may be reasons that you want to consider. So maybe you have some externally observable symptoms that you feel need to be explained. So sometimes I've worked with many individuals who have certain ways of speaking or interacting that are unexpected. And some people, when they meet you, might not be sure why you have that communication style. So in that case, you might just want to decide that you would like to disclose during an interview when they first meet you. And it's not that there's anything wrong. Everyone is different, but some ways of communicating are unexpected. So perhaps, like, an example would be, if you know that you have really poor eye contact and you have unexpected body language, then you might be somebody who in an interview situation might want to disclose and might need to disclose that you have autism. And we're going to talk about a little bit later a disclosure script that you could use, because it doesn't have to be a complicated method of disclosure. Maybe you have physical tics, or do you have verbal tics? So again, these are things that other people might observe in you when they meet you for an interview, and they may not be able to understand it unless you give them your explanation. And sometimes in life, when people have things that they don't understand, their brain has to come up with a reason. And so we want them to understand that we are qualified for the job, and we do have a lot of skills, and we can bring a lot of positivity in the role despite our unexpected communication style. So that's another big reason. I would say those are the top two reasons: needing an accommodation and also wanting to explain some physical, symptoms. And then finally, some people feel really strongly, I want to be an advocate for people with autism. I want, to be my whole self. I want people to know me. I don't need to have a secret. Autism's not some secret. So if you are autistic and you feel proud and you want your employer to know that autistic people are awesome, then you might consider disclosing for that reason, even if you didn't need an accommodation. But again, these are all your choice. So I hope that you're understanding that there's no set rule here. It's really about you knowing yourself and making decisions and making the best decision you can. Especially for those of you who are not sure about what your communication style is, or if you have some symptoms that are noticeable, you might want to ask a trusted person to help you come up with that decision. So that could be a family member, a parent. It could be me. I'm a case manager at CARD. It could be if you have a case manager already at CARD. or a therapist that you work with in the community, but someone that you trust who can help you and give you an honest answer about whether or not you have some symptoms that you might want to explain, some behaviors or communication style that you might want to explain. So how you should disclose, you know, there's many different ways you can choose to do it. According to the EEOC, that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, you don't have to say fancy words. You don't have to mention the ADA. You don't have to say the word accommodation or reasonable accommodation. You just have to let your employer know that you have a disability and you need an adjustment or a change at work. Now, they will have the right to request, your employer will have the right to request documentation. So if you tell them you have autism, they might ask to see a doctor's letter or some documentation that you have the disability. And then if you don't provide that documentation, they can deny your request. So even though you can, according to the EEOC, you can use plain language, I will say that I do think you should also put it in writing. So that might be if you have a simple conversation with a supervisor, you might just email them afterwards and say, I just want to remind you that, you know, I have this disability and I would like some accommodations. The other thing you're going to want to think about when you make this decision is, who do you disclose to? So this is going to be different at every job. If you work at a big company, you might have a human resources department. And so usually if you work someplace that has human resources, that's probably going to be the proper place to disclose. Otherwise, maybe you have a supervisor or someone called a manager who's over you. You can also, if you're at a big enough company that has an employee handbook, that information should be listed in the handbook. So you can check your handbook. But you can also, usually you can ask your direct supervisor if you have a question. So it's important for you to know who you can go to with questions at work, who can you go to if you need help, and that might be a person you can either disclose to, or if it's your supervisor, tell them I have a disability and what is the procedure to get accommodations. Some don'ts, you know, you don't need to tell everyone. Now, that's if you feel strongly, that's if you want to keep it private and confidential. It is private and confidential information. If you want to tell your coworkers, that's fine. You definitely do not want to talk about medications you take, therapists you see, or doctors you've been to unless it's essential. And by essential, I would mean perhaps you have an appointment, a standing appointment for therapy that maybe you need to, you know, run by with your supervisor and get that as an accommodation that you're allowed to go on that certain day. But you also don't need to tell the history of your diagnosis or problems you've had in the past. You know, many of us had times when we were more aggressive in the past or had trouble in school or difficulty with bullying, like any of those situations. We do not have to reveal those kind of information. It's still private. So just because you tell someone you have autism and you disclose your disability does not mean you need to disclose all the facts of your disability or your history. So the next question, so we talked about why and how, okay? And so then you're gonna want to figure out when. Because really it's up to you. You can request an accommodation at any time during the application process or while you're employed. So you don't want to necessarily disclose too soon. We're going to go over some things to think about for each of the types of scenarios. But you don't have to feel like you're not being honest if you don't disclose. So some people with hidden disabilities might feel that way, but that is not true. You do not have to. You're not obligated to disclose a disability at any time. So just because you've gotten a job, you didn't have to tell them that right away. It's really up to you, okay? At the same time as not disclosing too soon, you don't want to wait till it's too late. So you want to go ahead and disclose and request accommodations before your job performance suffers, or if you have conduct problems. Because if you do have these problems, the employer does not have to ignore or rescind any discipline that already occurred before they knew about your disability. So if your job performance is going down, 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 down for 6 months, and you don't want to tell them you have a disability and that you need accommodations, and you're being disciplined and about to be fired, it could be too late to be like, wait, I have autism and I need these accommodations. They don't have to remove those other things from your record. So that's really important to understand. So now we're going to talk about some ideas for accommodations that might be helpful specifically for people with autism. But of course, back to the how, because disclosing and asking for accommodations go together in some cases. So you want to put things in writing. If you're asking for certain accommodations, even if you have like that simple verbal conversation that we talked about, go ahead and follow it up with an email just so that you have some documentation. And also, this is really important. Always try to think of this as a request and not a demand. It's a conversation with your employer. So you should think about this as helping you to get your needs met so that you can perform your job, and you're going to continuously have this ongoing conversation. And then because it's not a demand and it's a request and it's a conversation, the employer can choose the method of accommodation. So you could ask for a certain type of accommodation, and the employer could say, well, we can't do that, but we can do this. And of course, there's a variety of things, situations that might occur. So it's really important to recognize that. You can ask for an accommodation, but you can't necessarily dictate exactly how they'll provide that accommodation. So these are just some samples that individuals with autism have sometimes felt were helpful or important for them. And I have them sort of categorized here based on the issues that you might struggle with, but you'll see that some of these ideas could help in a variety of ways. So sometimes when you're at work, there are some social situations that can be difficult for autistic people. And some of them are social and not always, structured, like parties, like Christmas parties or holiday parties. So you might need to ask to make that optional. And so that would be probably a conversation that you want to have along with disclosing your disability, that maybe you have social anxiety and it's really difficult for you to attend certain functions, and you want to make sure that you're not being penalized because you're unable to attend. You can also request help and examples that explain your expected conduct. So if you find that you're having difficulty understanding sort of the unwritten social rules and maybe you need someone to help you, you could ask for that. Also, some autistic people have a hard time understanding the corporate structure. Corporate structure means the hierarchy of who you go to if you have a problem or if you need help. And in most workplaces, you can't just jump to the big boss before you ask your supervisor. So some people get into trouble if they're not aware of how the hierarchy works or how the corporate structure works. I've worked with some people who aren't sure who is the president of the company and who's the director and who's just a supervisor. So you can actually request a visual chart. You can even create one yourself if that helps you too, but you can think about that as an accommodation. We'll talk about this in a minute. You can also request a sensitivity training for the workforce, which is something that we do at CARD. So then some people have trouble with organization. So maybe you want to work on a color-coded system for your files or your activities. Maybe you need a chart, a daily and maybe weekly chart to help you identify the work activities. I think it also helps people to be prepared and not surprised by what's coming ahead in the week. So perhaps you might need your supervisor to help you create a chart like that with your activities. Of course, we talked about a job coach, but using a job coach is an excellent way to help you get yourself organized. And some of these ideas that you'll see here are things that maybe a job coach can even help you create or help your workplace create for you. The other one I have highlighted here is to request your assignments in writing. or both verbally and in writing. I think a lot of people, if somebody's telling you, okay, well, you need to do this, 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 and this, it's easy to get sidetracked or to get off track and forget what you're supposed to do next. So having them in writing, having a checklist where you can check things off can be very, very helpful and important. Pictorial cues for your job. I'm going to show a couple of examples of those in a little bit. So maybe that would help you to have pictures of what a finished product is supposed to look like, depending on what kind of a job you have. And then, of course, creating a flow chart. Anything that helps you keep track of what you're supposed to do can be a good thing, and you can think of it as an accommodation if you want to request help from your supervisor. Okay, so here's an example of a task analysis or a visual guide for how to do scanning. So you can see all the steps have both pictures and words for them. And basically having these in the workplace, you might have request permission to put them up next to the scanning machine or the copy machine. And it actually helps everyone in the department usually. Here's another great idea. So if you are stocking, this person's in charge of stocking merchandise. So you can see that it not only has the steps with the check boxes, but then it also has pictures of what each step is going to look like and how it looks when it's done, which can be incredibly helpful. You can ask for that. Another one, this is a Mighty One labeler. So this is how to load it, which is excellent. And I love this also because, you know, if you are in charge of doing this kind of a task, again, sometimes it's really important to have a visual representation of what it's supposed to look like. And some of us even like start doing things and then they never seem to look quite right. So these kind of pictures can really help you in your job. So some more accommodations. You can request structured breaks away from your workstation. So this might need to be an accommodation if you are at a job where your supervisor is going to walk by and see you not at your desk. So you might want them to know where you are. You can request a private workspace. So that can help you not be disturbed by other people, but also maybe you not disturb other people, disturb your coworkers if you do have a lot of excess fidgeting that you do. Redesigning an office space so that audible and visual distractions are minimized. That's a possibility. And then for anxiety, depending on your workplace, some of these you'll notice on all the ones I've suggested could be things that you just do for yourself. Like in my office, I have a private office, and it wouldn't be a big deal if I can organize my office how I want. I could use squeezy balls. I can make a phone call. Nobody's really watching me. But some of you will have jobs where you're maybe in a more shared public space, or you are in a customer service environment where you're in front of people. So then you have to have them as a requested accommodation. So squeeze balls or sensory items. Work from home. Sometimes, again, depending on what the situation of the company is and your job and your essential functions of the job, we always keep that in mind. Perhaps working from home is possible. Perhaps having a support animal is possible. Can you make telephone calls if you are incredibly stressed out and you need support from a loved one or a therapist or a counselor or a case manager? Also, are you easily startled? Is there a certain way that you would request that employees approach you? Maybe that could be something that you need as an accommodation. And sometimes people do have modified work schedules. So again, it's all a conversation with your employer, and it's based on the essential functions of the job, the employment environment, and what things are possible. So sometimes now I have done this training for CARD. I will go out into different employment agencies or locations, companies where people are working, and do training about learning a little bit about autism and maybe some of the strengths and challenges that individuals with autism face. So if you are an employee or if the employee requests this, we can do an autism awareness training for the supervisory staff or all staff, depending, but it always has to be based on the permission of the employee and their desires and how much, because again, their information is confidential. So it's all about how much they would like to give that information to employers, to their employer and to their employees. But it can also be very helpful for employees to understand the individual and then awareness of other autism in general in the community as well. So again, we will do that training upon request if you need it. So the other accommodations that are really important, not a lot of people realize this, but you can get accommodations before you get the job. So we've had someone who was supposed to who found out that his job was going to be a group interview, which means maybe an employer with a group of applicants. And he really felt that for many reasons that would be very difficult for him. So he disclosed his disability and requested that he have an individual interview based on his disability, and he was given that accommodation. You can ask for interview questions in advance. You can suggest that you have an initial interview by phone. Maybe you could request that the interview occur at a specific time of day. So that could be an accommodation, or you can just, if you know yourself, if you know that you take certain medication that makes you groggy in the morning, try to schedule your interview in the afternoon. Or if you take medication that makes you peppy, then you want to schedule it when that medication is working the best. If they're not able to be flexible in their time, then you may want to disclose and have that as an accommodation. And then you can, in certain circumstances, you can request additional time for skills tests that you have to take pre-employment. So it's a possibility that you can request. So we're going to go through some of the decisions and the situations and some pros and cons, because like I said in the beginning, this is really about learning about the law, understanding how it applies to you, understanding your workplace, your staff that you work with, their points of view, and your own comfort level with disclosing, and then making your best decision. And of course, no situation is perfect sometimes. And sometimes you do your best and you want to make a decision and you go, oh, it didn't work out. So, but it's all based on what's comfortable for you. So the first situation would be disclosing before the interview. So maybe that's during the application process. Or maybe it's when they call you for an interview, you want to say, okay, I have autism, to let them know. And again, if you think about the why for that, I would say in the most cases, your why for this one would be because you want some accommodations for the actual interview or for the pre-employment process, okay? So obviously the pros, like you can get your accommodations in place for the hiring process. So did you need to have the interview questions ahead of time? Then you're going to want to disclose ahead of time, right? So the other good thing is that it allows the employer to research a little bit about the ADA. So I mentioned this before, many employers don't know anything about the ADA, about disabilities, about accommodations, about the law, or maybe they're even unsure. They heard something, but they don't really know. So this gives them time so they can research it, okay? So the con is that we don't know if people have stereotypes about people with disabilities. So if you're telling them before you even are called for an interview, if they do have, certain stereotypes, then that gives them like advanced time to think about it and go, well, do I want to take on a person with a disability? If some people don't know that, how awesome autistic people can be, they might, we're not sure, we don't know how they might feel. So that's just one of the cons. So another choice that some people make is during the interview. And we talked about that before. If you are somebody who has some outward signs or communication differences that are unexpected. Remember, we talked about that. So then you might choose to just say it during the interview. And I do like this for many people. I've worked on this with people before. We can practice together. So it gives you the chance to kind of read the body language of the employer. You can say it at the right time when you want to, as the interview's going on, you can see if it's going well or not, you can decide when to say it. And then you can also disclose like briefly, you can just say it positively, you don't have to make it such a big deal. You can just be like, well, I have this and here's what accommodations I need. It could be simple. The cons are that you could catch this person off guard. Maybe, like I said, if this is an employer who doesn't know anything about disabilities, doesn't know anything about autism, doesn't know anything about the ADA, or feels worried that they might say the wrong thing, that could be a con. That could be a bad thing. They also might have their own biases, kind of like we talked about in the previous one. And that's something that you may run into, and you can't really help it. You still have to make your best choice and then see what happens in the situation. So then another one that some people might is like after they get the job offer. So if you go through an interview and an application and you get hired, and then you tell them when they hire you, I have autism and I'm going to need some accommodations. If they rescind their hiring offer, if they decide, never mind, you're not going to have the job, then, you could have some legal recourse. You could hire an attorney, disability rights attorney or employment attorney, and say that you were discriminated against. So that could be a pro if you think of it that way. The other thing is that I think a better pro would be that you can get accommodations into place before you start. So, and then you're starting off like on a positive relationship where you're telling them about yourself and asking for help. So a con is that they could feel weird about the fact that you went through this whole interview where they said, tell me about yourself. And you told them all about yourself. And then you got the job and they're like, by the way, also I have autism. So they might feel like you're being a little dishonest in the process. And so that can put a damper on the trust between you just to get started. Okay. So here's another one, which I think is a pretty decent choice for some people, is after you already start your job. So what it does is it allows you to meet the people, see what the environment is like, you tailor your decisions on how and when you want to disclose based on where you actually work. It gives you also time to say, okay, I didn't realize, but I'm going to need accommodations with this. You can sort of get your brain together based on what your situation is. You also could just, start out by talking to some coworkers about disability and just see how it goes and feel it out a little bit. Again, so one of the cons is that it could take longer to get your accommodations. So if you have accommodations that you really need in order to get your job started off right and to do your job to the fullest, if you've waited to tell them, it just could take more time to get them set up. And then again, you're looking at this that it could possibly your employer could have like an emotional feeling that maybe you weren't that honest, and they could end up feeling negatively about that. So you can see in all these decisions, your employer is human. So you're working for people, your supervisor, your manager, your directors, the board of directors, everyone, they're all people. And so everyone who's a person has bias, internal bias and feelings about things. Sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're positive. So I just when you're thinking about your decisions, it's just important to think about the different possibilities, okay? Now, here's one that I see too many people doing in some circumstances. So the situation is waiting to disclose to see if you need help, okay? So generally, when people do this, when they wait, they kind of are hoping that they may never have to disclose. So that's generally what it is like people are like, I don't want to tell them I have autism, so I'm just going to wait and see if I need accommodations. I'm going to see if I don't really think I need accommodations, so I'm just going to wait and see. So those people, if you wait, till performance difficulties arrives, again, like I said before, it could be too late. So they could have difficulty changing their opinion of you or their perception of you. So if your work performance has not been good this entire time. And then again, as humans, they also might feel like, why did you wait so long? You know, you should have told us earlier, we could have worked this out. So, and again, when performance difficulties arrive, you could still be fired if you wait too long. So that's important to remember. So we talked about one of the choices of times is during the interview. And as we said, there's pros and cons to it, but I think especially for individuals, if you're somebody who has some, like we said, a different communication style, something that's unexpected, perhaps body movements that might be unexpected, or facials that might be, unusual, that somebody's, maybe other people will notice about you. You might want to disclose during the interview. And so this is a disclosure script that I've created, and I kind of like it because it's simple and it ends on a positive note, okay? And anytime you're in any interview, you always want to have your answers be that you're excited about the opportunity and you know you can do a good job. You want to portray confidence. So this kind of a script will let you say that you have a disability and why you're telling them this, but then that you're incredibly confident that despite this, you are going to do a great job. So I kind of started, and you can say, when you disclose, you can call your disability whatever it is that you say. So many people say they have Asperger's syndrome, even though that's an older form of the diagnosis, that still counts as autism and it still counts as a disability. Some people like to say high functioning autism. Some people say autism spectrum disorder. Some people might say I'm autistic. It's up to you. This is your information and it's your way of choosing how to disclose. And so there's no right or wrong. So you might say, I would like you to know that I have autism spectrum disorder. So you may notice that I sometimes, and this is where you might say the things they might notice about you. Sometimes don't make good eye contact and have some extra body movements. On the other hand, I am extremely detail-oriented and I'm a very loyal and hard worker. I know that I can do a great job at this company and I'm really excited about this opportunity. So you're explaining why you do need to say something about why you're telling them, okay? So you would say, I have autism, this is why I'm telling you, but on the other hand, this is what makes me great and I would do a great job in this position. So I like that. If your choice is to disclose during an interview, then I think this is the way to do it. I also would suggest most interviews will ask, a common question is, tell me about yourself. So if you've decided that you're going to disclose, I would practice this. I would practice your disclosure during that question. But I have worked with people and listened to interviews where they didn't say the questions we thought. So if that happens, you could always, at the end of the interview, if they haven't asked you the question you thought you were going to answer with disclosure, you could always say, oh, by the way, there's another thing I wanted to tell you about myself, and then say your disclosure script. If you've decided that disclosing in an interview is the right thing, then make it happen. So don't just wait for them to ask you the right question, okay? Plan a way that you can say it without them asking you that question. So there's a couple of really great resources here that I want everyone to know about if you need help with this issue. If you're registered with CARD, you can come to me and we can talk about it. But this website is where I go to get answers. It's called JAN, which is the Job Accommodations Network. So their website is askjan.org. They also have a hotline phone number. They have an online chat. This is a resource from the Department of Labor, and their services are free. They have an incredibly extensive library, including some packets of accommodations, which are helpful. And they even have their library organized by disability. So you can search for things about autism and you find a ton of articles and information. They also are a website that can help they're geared to help both employers and employees, which is really wonderful. So if you work at a business and you disclose and they really are like, we don't know what to do, you can even give them this information. They can get help and resources for how to create accommodations and how to help you and help understanding what the law is. So I think that's a great resource to have. Another one is the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They are the enforcing agency for Title I of the ADA. And so this is their phone number and their website. They have a lot of publications which are linked here, and that's where you would go to make a complaint. So if you do feel like you've been discriminated against. So these are some more packets that go through the decision-making process that we've just been talking about. And so I wanted to talk a little bit before we end about the services that we provide at UM-NSU CARD. So like I said, I'm a case manager and my focus is on employment. So we do provide individual consultation and support. So I've helped write resumes, we've done interview preparation, I've helped people search for jobs, talked about disclosure, and given different referrals for local resources. I also have worked with employers, so I've consulted with them and I can help come up with, kind of observe and come up with ideas for accommodations if needed. And then we also run some groups for adults. So our one that meets twice a month is called Job Club, and it's an hour-long session for registered CARD constituents that we talk about a different employment-related topic each time. Job Seekers is an employment intensive program that we run over the summer, and it's geared towards individuals who are verbal and able to apply for competitive employment. And then our newest project, which will be hopefully starting next year, is called Project Work, which is really geared towards individuals who might be looking for supported employment. And so they might need some extra help comprehending, and we're going to do things a little bit differently and talk about even like how to work with a job coach, things like that. So those are some of our services. And again, all of those services are for registered CARD constituents. And so the way that you register are you either call our main office number, which is 1-800-9-AUTISM, or you can go to our website, which is umcard.org, and we have a pre-registration form there. So in order to make an intake appointment, you need to have some documentation that you have an ASD diagnosis or a dual sensory diagnosis. So this is our final page with our contact information and also a QR code that you can use, which will pull up a pre-registration form for you. We serve individuals in Dade, Broward, and Monroe counties. So thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it. And I will hope to see you soon.